Santa Monica shimmered beneath a honey-colored morning sun, its air already warm with the scent of ocean salt and hot concrete. Inside the sleek glass walls of the Ferrari dealership on Ocean Avenue, a tension thicker than engine oil clung to the polished floor tiles. Elora King stood quietly by the open bay, her hands folded calmly in front of her grease, still beneath her fingernails, boots scuffed from hours under cars, eyes steady. Preston Vale laughed. Not the casual kind of laugh you share at lunch, but the sharp, performative kind, loud enough for every mechanic in the service bay to hear. "You really think I'd let someone like you lay a finger on my Portofino?" he scoffed, wiping a non-existent tear from the corner of his eye. The car in question, a cherry-red Ferrari with a $500,000 price tag, sat idle behind him, silent, lifeless, and unfixable for weeks. Its problem had baffled the in-house technicians, each one scratching their heads and referring again and again to Ferrari's pristine manuals, only to return to the same result: nothing worked. But none of that mattered now, not to Preston, and certainly not when a black woman in work boots had dared to suggest she might have a solution. Mechanics froze mid-task, their wrenches paused mid-air. Some turned their heads discreetly, pretending not to listen. Others didn't even bother pretending. It wasn't every day you witnessed a CEO publicly dismiss someone like that, and certainly not someone like her. Elora didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, much worse. She'd grown up in Crenshaw, where confidence was currency and doubt could get you hurt. Her education hadn't come easy. MIT didn't roll out red carpets for girls from South LA, and the Formula One world wasn't exactly handing out invites to black women with calloused hands and quiet brilliance. But she had clawed her way into the engineering team at McLaren, worked under pressure that made men cry, and left only to care for her dying grandmother. The grease under her nails earned, the silence in her eyes learned. "I pay 50 grand a year for expert service," Preston continued, circling her, like a game show host auditioning for cruelty. Not to be lectured by someone who probably learned from watching YouTube. The dig landed harder than he knew, not because it was true, but because it was so predictably empty. The kind of insult that doesn't attack the work, but the person. The kind of insult that comes from fear disguised as superiority. She took a breath, subtle but steady. Mike, the shop's manager, tried to step in. "Maybe we should at least hear." Preston held up a hand like a courtroom judge. "Don't waste my time, Mike. I've had enough of this circus. Get her out of here." Elora stayed right where she was. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low but cutting. "The issue isn't electronics," she said, speaking not to Preston, but to the car. "It's a harmonic desynchronization between the turbo and the injection system. You've got frequency drift in your pressure control valve. 5 minutes of realignment, and that engine will run better than it did off the factory line." Preston blinked, then laughed again, slower this time, like the joke had evolved into some delicious absurdity. "Harmonic desynchronization," he repeated, tasting the syllables like candy. "Are you just making these terms up now?" One of the senior techs, a man named Ray, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Actually, we've tried everything. Even contacted Marinello." He looked down, embarrassed to even be saying it. She might not be wrong. Preston ripped the business card Elora had placed on the windshield into 2 pieces without even looking at it. He turned to Mike. "Next time, screen better. I don't want people like her in here. This is a professional environment." Silence followed like thunder after lightning. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock dared to move. Elora's boots echoed lightly as she turned to go. At the glass door, she paused, glanced once more over her shoulder at the silent rows of men in coveralls and suits, and said, "When you're desperate enough to listen, my card will still be on your windshield." No one laughed that time. Not even Preston. Only she smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of the mouth that belonged not to a loser, but to someone playing a much longer game. Outside, the street hummed with life. Elora walked into the California light, the sun glinting off her cheekbones, her shadow long and steady on the pavement. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because she already knew some lessons the world insists on learning the hard way. 2 days passed. The Santa Monica sun still shone like gold, but for Preston Vale, something had shifted. At the Polo Lounge, nestled beneath tall palms and white umbrellas, he recounted the story of the mechanic girl to a table of executives over chilled white wine and dry-aged steak. He leaned back, his voice theatrical, performing as though the whole episode had been some brilliant comedy. You should have seen her, he said, swirling his glass, covered in oil, talking like she invented engines. Told me there was a frequency drift in the pressure valve. Honestly, I thought she was about to cast a spell. The men around him laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were supposed to. One of them, David Thornton's CEO of a tech startup, raised an eyebrow. And she just walked in. Uninvited, Preston smirked. That's the world now, isn't it? Everyone thinks they're an expert. He didn't know that even as he spoke, a video recorded on a shaky phone inside the dealership was quietly making the rounds. Captioned, "CEO humiliates black mechanic," and gets owned, it began spreading through employee WhatsApp groups, then Reddit threads, and then Twitter, where a viral post read, "This is how they treat black women in tech. Remember her name?" And someone did. At an engineering conference in San Diego, Emilia Bianchi, Ferrari's North America Director of Engineering, sat through a presentation on machine learning in predictive diagnostics. It was interesting, sure, but what caught her attention was what someone whispered behind her. She heard a Portofino's issue by ear said it was harmonic resonance, and she was right. Emilia turned. Who? A street mechanic? Some black woman in LA. The guy she told laughed in her face. Emilia leaned forward. What was her name? King. Elora King, I think. That night, Emilia canceled her return flight and rerouted her driver to Crenshaw. Elora's garage didn't look like much from the outside, just a converted shipping container and two portable bays on cracked asphalt, but inside it was immaculate. Labeled tools hung like artwork. Laptops sat open next to engine mounts. A disassembled V8 sat on a workbench, shining like sculpture. "You're Elora King?" Emilia asked as she stepped out of her black Ferrari Roma. "I am. I heard you diagnosed a Portofino with your ears." Elora wiped her hands and raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Who wants to know?" Emilia Bianchi, Ferrari Engineering. She smiled gently. "And I want to know everything." In the next 30 minutes, Elora explained what she'd heard, the vibration patterns, the timing drift, how the turbo and fuel injection were speaking out of rhythm like musicians not listening to each other. Emilia listened not just with interest but with awe. "No diagnostic system caught this?" Elora asked. "Our teams in Maranello have been chasing it for 6 months," Emilia admitted. "You nailed it in seconds." Elora didn't react. She'd learned not to flinch when people were surprised she was brilliant. "That's what happens when you grow up listening to engines like they're people," she said. "They tell you things if you're patient." Emilia paused, then said softly, "We'd like to work with you, not officially. Yet. But I'd like to start with a few private cases." Elora nodded. "One condition." "Name it." "I want to start with a Portofino that's been a real headache for one particular client." Her eyes gleamed. "Let's call it poetic calibration." Emilia smiled. "I think I know the one." Across town, Preston was pouring another glass of wine when his phone rang. Mike from the dealership sounded tight with panic. "We tried another recalibration. It got worse." Preston sat up. "Worse? You told me this was under control. We might have to replace the engine block." "Replace it? That's a $200,000 fix." Mike hesitated. "We might have another option. Ferrari is sending someone, a technical consultant." Preston sighed with relief, oblivious to the storm heading straight for him. A consultant, huh, finally. Someone who knows what they're doing. He had no idea who that someone really was. Preston didn't sleep that night. 200 grand to fix a Ferrari. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. The embarrassment. The implication that something so expensive, so elite could be broken. And worse, that no one under his payroll, no one in his Rolodex had been able to fix it. So when Mike called the next morning with news that Ferrari was sending a certified technical consultant to assess the vehicle, Preston grabbed onto it like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. He didn't ask for a name. He didn't care. All he heard was Ferrari, consultant, official. Meanwhile, across town, Elora stood beneath the morning sun outside her shop in Crenshaw, watching a sleek black car pull up. Emilia stepped out holding a folder and a smile that said everything was moving exactly as it should. "It's confirmed," Emilia said. "The board approved your consultancy. It's a 5-year agreement with full access to proprietary systems and diagnostic labs. And this," she handed Elora a leather folder with a silver Ferrari emblem, "is your official badge." Elora took it with a calm nod. What's my first assignment? Amelia didn't have to say it. They both knew. That Portofino in Santa Monica, she said. We'll be arriving as Ferrari representatives. You in uniform, me in heels. Elora smiled faintly. Then let's do it properly. That afternoon, Mike paced nervously inside the dealership, glancing every few seconds at the glass entrance. He hadn't told Preston the full story. He couldn't. Not until they arrived. All he'd said was, they'll be here soon. When the two women walked through the door, one in a tailored business suit, the other in a pressed white technician's uniform, the entire showroom seemed to shift. Time slowed. Conversations hushed. Mechanics straightened. The temperature in the room somehow dropped a degree. Preston entered 5 minutes later, all sunglasses and swagger, tossing his keys to no one in particular. Where's this Ferrari genius consultant? He asked, his voice already 2 steps ahead of himself. He turned toward the bay and froze. Elora stood over his Ferrari stethoscope, in hand, one boot propped against the frame, as she listened closely to the rhythm of the engine. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She knew he was there. Preston's voice caught somewhere between confusion and outrage. What the hell is going on? Amelia stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Vale, allow me to introduce Elora King, our new exclusive technical consultant for the West Coast region, graduate of MIT, former engineer at McLaren Racing, and the only person in this building who's correctly diagnosed your engine issue? No. No way, he said, voice rising. This is a joke. Elora finally looked up. I told you the first time. Harmonic desynchronization between your turbo and injection system. Nothing's changed, except now I've been hired to say it in an official capacity. The room was silent. Test the car, Amelia said, nodding toward the driver's seat. With hands that trembled, Preston climbed in. He turned the key. The engine came to life, not just running, but singing. Smooth, balanced, refined. The hum of it wrapped the space in perfection. He said nothing, couldn't. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, the realization pressing down like weight. That was when his phone buzzed. Again and again. Jennifer's voice frantic on the other end. Sir, the video's now at 800,000 views. CNN, Forbes, and the Journal are all calling. 3 corporate clients dropped their contracts this morning. Elora didn't move. She simply watched him, eyes steady, jaw calm. Why? He whispered hoarsely. Why are you doing this? Elora walked over, wiped her hands on a towel, and answered with a quiet finality. I didn't do anything to you, Mr. Vale. You did this to yourself. And for once he had nothing to say. The silence after Elora's words lingered longer than it should have. It filled the space between them like a fog that Preston couldn't see through. He stood beside his now perfect Ferrari engine, humming like silk, but the look on his face said none of it mattered. Not anymore. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to reclaim the power he had just watched slip from his hands in front of half a dozen employees and an official from Ferrari. But instead he stayed frozen, the weight of consequence settling into his chest like lead. Amelia broke the silence. We'll be documenting the repair for Ferrari's internal research, she said almost casually. It's rare we get to validate an acoustic diagnosis of this complexity in real time. It's historic, actually. A few phones in the room were already lifted discreetly, not by the press, but by the mechanics, the assistants, even one customer who had wandered in and now realized he was witnessing something bigger than a routine car repair. Preston turned to Mike. This can't be happening. Tell me this is some kind of setup. Mike didn't look away, but his voice was barely above a whisper. Everything checks out, sir. Ferrari confirmed her credentials. She's who she says she is. Who she says she is, Preston barked. She's Elora stepped forward, eyes unwavering. Careful. The word dropped like a brick in the middle of the showroom floor. Just one word, but it carried enough weight to make even Preston rethink the sentence he was about to finish. He looked around and realized they were all still watching. Not just watching, filming. She was no longer the outsider here, and he was no longer untouchable. You humiliated me, he said suddenly, his voice cracking with something that wasn't quite anger, more like desperation in a mask. You made me look like a fool. Elora shook her head slowly. You did that all on your own. As she packed her tools, a low ping echoed from her own phone. A notification. Then another. She glanced at the screen and couldn't help the flicker of amusement in her expression. She turned the phone toward Preston. His face stared back at him, frozen mid-laugh from the original video. The caption beneath it, "Ferrari hires the black woman." He mocked and she fixed his $500K car in 15 minutes. "It's trending," she said simply. CNN, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, TechNet. You've made quite the headline. Preston looked sick. He pulled out his own phone and began scrolling frantically, thumbing through article after article. Headlines screamed at him. Discrimination meets its match. The woman who hears what Ferrari can't. CEO mocked her now. She's his Ferrari's savior. Jennifer's name flashed again on his screen. "Mr. Vale," her voice came through trembling. "The board has called an emergency meeting. They want to discuss your status. Effective immediately." He staggered slightly, reaching for the edge of a workbench to steady himself. The same man who had strutted in 30 minutes ago with $1,000 shoes and a smirk now looked like a child who'd lost his way in the dark. James, the senior mechanic who had once laughed along with Preston, stepped forward. His voice was tentative. "Elora, I owe you an apology. We all do. You were right. About everything." Preston whirled around red-faced. "Don't you start." But James didn't flinch. "No, sir. You started this." And then softly Elora said, "Finish the sentence, Mr. Vale." Preston turned toward her, slowly, confusion painted across his face. "What you were about to say something earlier. About people like me? Go ahead, finish it. Let them all hear who you really are." The room held its breath, but he didn't say a word. Couldn't, because sometimes silence screams louder than confession. Elora picked up her case, nodded once to Amelia, and turned toward the door. As she stepped into the California light once again, the buzz of phones and whispered disbelief behind her, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had said everything that needed saying, and this time the whole world was listening. By the time the glass doors swung shut behind Elora, the air inside the dealership had turned heavy, not with heat but with something colder. Preston remained planted where he stood, the tremor in his hands betraying the storm inside. Around him no one spoke. The only sound came from the Ferrari, its engine still idling in quiet perfection, the exact hum Elora had promised. He shut it off. Outside, camera crews were already arriving. A CNN van parked across the street. Someone inside the dealership whispered her name, Elora King, and someone else repeated it this time with something like awe. Inside his office, Preston slumped into his leather chair, a man unraveling. The high-rise skyline that once represented status now looked like a wall closing in. He checked his email sponsor withdrawals, formal complaints, subject lines that all said the same thing without saying it outright. "You're a liability now." His publicist sent a single-line crisis response team, recommends silence until legal counsel is assigned. Silence. The same silence he had demanded of others now wrapped around him like a straitjacket. Meanwhile, Elora was in a different kind of space, one filled with light and movement. Back at her garage, she stood before a group of young girls from the neighborhood, all in coveralls too big for them, gathered around a rusted engine. "This," she said, placing her hand on the valve casing, "isn't just metal. It's music. If you learn to listen to it, it'll tell you everything." A girl no older than 10 raised her hand. "Did you really fix a Ferrari that even the company couldn't fix?" Elora grinned. "That's what they say." Back across town, Preston tried to speak at a hastily arranged shareholder meeting over Zoom, but his voice cracked before he could finish a sentence. His board didn't need to hear more. The video, the articles, the headlines, they had spoken for him. "We can't have a man accused of public discrimination as the face of our firm," one director said bluntly. "Government contracts are at risk. Our brand is at risk." "I didn't do anything illegal," Preston argued weakly. "But you did something worse," another voice cut in. "You showed us who you are." The vote was unanimous. Preston was out. No press conference, no apology drafted by lawyers, just a silent deletion like a file no one wanted to open again. That weekend, Elora received an invitation to speak at the World Engineering Conference in Berlin. The email called her a paradigm-shifting voice in automotive diagnostics. It wasn't the title that made her smile, it was the footnote. "Your travel and accommodations will be fully covered by Ferrari Global." She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Not long ago, she'd been laughed out of a showroom. Now her name was printed on official Ferrari letterhead. The irony didn't make her bitter. It made her resolved. Preston, on the other hand, spent his weekend alone. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. His phone, once a non-stop burst of messages and meetings, now sat still on the marble counter. Even the house staff had quit. On Sunday afternoon, he walked into a roadside diner, the kind with sticky menus and fluorescent lights, looking for something he couldn't name. He sat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and stared blankly at the small TV mounted above the soda machine. The image on screen, Laura King standing beside Emilia Bianchi at a press event in Maranello. Behind them, a new Ferrari prototype, and the words "Acoustic Diagnostics" by Laura King. The reporter called her the future of Ferrari's innovation. Preston didn't finish his coffee. He simply lowered his head, pressed his palms against the cold formica, and whispered to no one. How the hell did it all fall apart? But he knew. It didn't fall apart. He tore it apart with his own mouth, his own ego, and his own refusal to listen. And now the world was listening to her. The words the world was listening to her weren't just poetic. They were literal. Within weeks, Laura King's name became more than a headline. It became a movement. Engineering schools started quoting her in lectures. Tech blogs dissected her method like scripture. Ferrari dealerships worldwide rolled out new training modules based on her acoustic diagnostic principles. She wasn't just a consultant anymore. She was the revolution no one saw coming. At the World Engineering Conference in Berlin, the applause began before she even reached the podium. Elora stepped onto the stage wearing a navy blue blazer with the Ferrari crest stitched above her heart. Her hair was braided back, her expression calm, but her eyes shimmered with something electric. She didn't bring slides or graphs, no complex jargon, just her voice. Competence, she began, doesn't come with a skin tone or a zip code or a pedigree. It doesn't need an accent or a designer label. Competence is earned every single day, in silence, in sweat, in patience. The room was still. Even the cameras zoomed in like they knew this moment wasn't meant to be just seen. It was meant to be felt. An engine doesn't care who you are, she continued. It only responds to truth, consistency, and care. That's all the world should respond to, too. Her words landed like thunder wrapped in velvet. Some in the audience stood before she even finished. By the time she walked off stage, her phone was already buzzing with congratulations, interviews, offers. But Elora didn't pause for fame. She didn't soak in the spotlight. She returned home quietly to her tools, to her students, to the same cracked pavement that had shaped her. Meanwhile, Preston Vale sat in the back corner of a warehouse cafe in Long Beach, a place that didn't ask questions and didn't recognize his face, which was exactly why he kept coming back. He worked under a false name now, part-time, cleaning tables, washing floors, sometimes delivering food in the rain. He told himself it was temporary, that he was regrouping. But every time he tried to plan a comeback, another article popped up, another reminder that the industry no longer took his calls. His name had become synonymous with a lesson, not in business and hubris. One evening during his break, he borrowed a coworker's phone and pulled up YouTube. The first video in his feed, Elora King, How One Woman Changed Ferrari Forever. He pressed play. It was a montage. Her interview with CNN, a clip of her smiling beside Emilia Bianchi, a moment where she kneeled next to a student in her training garage, guiding the girl's hand to the right part of an engine. The voiceover said she didn't tear down the man who mocked her. She just built something so extraordinary he became irrelevant. Preston closed the video. He stared out the small kitchen window where rain tapped softly against the glass. He wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter, just hollow. A man reduced to the silence he once forced on others. Back in Crenshaw, Laura unlocked the gate to her new facility, a bigger space this time, fully equipped. Ferrari had helped sponsor it along with several tech companies that once overlooked her resume. But the logo outside wasn't Ferrari's. It read, "The Listening Garage." Inside, 10 young girls in oversized work shirts and ponytails stood around an engine on a platform. One of them leaned in, ear close to the valve casing. "I think it's off by a millisecond," she whispered. Elora nodded. "Tell me where you hear it." The girl pointed. Her hand was confident. "That's it," Elora said. "You're hearing it. Another student asked Miss Elora. Were you scared when they laughed at you? Elora smiled. No, she said, because I wasn't the one who was afraid. The room fell quiet, not out of sadness, but understanding. Sometimes the loudest power in the world doesn't come from shouting. It comes from listening and refusing to be silenced. And Elora King. She was never quiet. The world had just never listened until now. The listening garage had become more than a training space. It was a kind of sanctuary. Each wall told a story, framed photos of young girls in grease-streaked jumpsuits, laughing over engines posing beside their first solo repair jobs. Quotes were painted above the workstations, some from famous engineers, others from Elora herself. One in bold white letters read, "Your ears will take you places your resume can't." On a quiet Saturday morning, Elora walked through the garage before class, sipping coffee from a dented thermos she refused to replace. She paused beside a student named Jada, 11 years old, small frame. Big questions. The girl was crouched beside a dusty engine block, eyes narrowed, head tilted, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Elora knelt beside her. "What are you hearing?" she asked. Jada frowned, thoughtful. "It doesn't sound even. Like the rhythm's off, kind of like someone breathing too fast." Elora's lips curled into a smile. "You're right. That's the fuel line misfiring on the second cylinder." "Good catch." Jada looked up, her face lighting up. Really? You've got ears for this. That's rare." The moment felt so familiar it almost hurt. Elora could still remember her own childhood, lying under her grandfather's Chevelle, listening to him hum with the engine, like the two of them spoke in a language no one else understood. That's where it had all started. Not at MIT, not at McLaren, not even in that Ferrari showroom. It started right here, with listening. Later that afternoon, the girls took a break, and as they scattered across the garage with juice boxes and plastic chairs, one of them approached Elora hesitantly. Her name was Kayla, shy, quiet, always scribbling notes in a spiral-bound notebook. "Miss Elora," she said, "can I ask something personal?" "Of course. Were you scared that day when they laughed at you in that fancy place?" Elora didn't answer right away. She looked out the window for a moment, watching the wind shake the chain-link fence that surrounded the lot. Then she turned back. "No," she said gently, "because I knew something they didn't." Kayla blinked. "What that they were scared of me, of what I knew, of what I could do. People laugh loudest when they're afraid of what they can't understand." The garage was quiet again, not awkward, but reverent. Even the kids who hadn't been listening had gone still. Because when Elora spoke, it wasn't just words. It was weight. It was legacy. Miles away in a roadside diner off the highway, a man wiped down tables while a portable TV in the corner aired a news segment. His uniform was faded, name tag slightly crooked. Preston. His face was gaunter, no beard, unkempt, eyes dulled. But he stopped when he saw her face on screen. Elora standing in front of a crowd of young girls, smiling, surrounded by open engine bays and banners that read, "Built by Listening." The reporter's voiceover said, once mocked in a luxury dealership, Elora King now trains the next generation of engineers, proving that knowledge isn't born in privilege, but in perseverance. Preston stood there, rag in hand, frozen. His reflection looked back at him in the greasy chrome of the counter, a man who had everything and chose to ignore what truly mattered. He didn't change the channel. Back at the garage, Elora placed a hand on Kayla's shoulder and smiled. "One day they might laugh at you too," she said. "Let them. Just keep listening." And then she walked back to her workbench, surrounded by students who didn't just want to fix engines, they wanted to hear them, understand them, respect them. On the far wall, newly painted in red block letters, a final message stood out beneath the Ferrari emblem. Competence has no color. Listening is leadership. And under that, in smaller script written by hand, this garage doesn't build cars. It builds futures. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a reminder that real power comes from patience, skill, and heart. Thank you for watching and for listening.